The trained dog sniffed the elderly woman's suitcase and began whining, as if it had sensed something painful. The police officers approached, intrigued, never imagining that inside they would find evidence of a silent sacrifice, which moved even the toughest among them and left everyone speechless. Claire Hudson had never imagined that a single dog could turn a routine day at the airport into an event that would stun the entire city. As lead security officer at Pinewood International, she believed she had seen it all: suspicious travelers with forged documents, last-minute drama at the check-in desk, even an escaped reptile once found hiding in a passenger's bag. Yet none of those incidents prepared her for the moment when Ranger, the highly trained detection dog, froze in front of an elderly woman's suitcase, his nose quivering with alarm. Ranger was no ordinary dog. The Belgian Malinois had been part of an elite canine unit specializing in narcotics and contraband detection before an injury forced him into early retirement. Most dogs might have settled into a quieter life, but Ranger's drive and intelligence were such that the airport security division took him on, trusting his keen sense of smell to keep travelers safe. Under Claire's careful supervision, Ranger quickly became a local legend, uncovering stolen art, detecting hidden ammunition, and even alerting to rare exotic animals illegally smuggled across borders. Each time, his calm focus and remarkable accuracy left everyone amazed. That morning, Pinewood International bustled with the usual flow of passengers. Families lugged heavy luggage, business travelers scrolled through emails, and tired tourists looked forward to final getaways. Claire stood near the checkpoint, scanning the lines for anything out of place. She never missed a detail, from a child's anxious glance to a couple's hushed argument. Ranger walked beside her, his sensitive nose always testing the air. Though Claire had grown used to his subtle signals, the moment he halted abruptly in front of a small, silver-haired woman named Bernice Wilcox, her heart lurched with sudden apprehension. Bernice appeared perfectly ordinary at first glance. She wore a lilac cardigan and clutched a delicate purse that matched her sensible shoes. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she passed her boarding pass to the attendant. Nothing in her manner seemed suspicious, until Ranger began circling her large, rose-patterned suitcase with undeniable intent. Claire had seen that behavior before. Whenever Ranger found a clue, he would lower his body, stiffen his ears, and grow intent on the object of interest. Sure enough, his pointed stare at Bernice's suitcase told Claire that something about this piece of luggage demanded serious attention. Claire kept her voice polite as she approached Bernice, mindful that an elderly passenger might be startled by direct confrontation. "Ma'am," she said, showing her airport ID, "we need to perform a routine inspection of your luggage. Ranger here indicated we should take a closer look." Bernice's eyes widened behind her thick glasses. She gave a nervous smile and nodded, though Claire could sense a tense hesitation lurking beneath that gentle facade. The older woman watched intently as Claire guided the suitcase to a nearby inspection table. "Don't worry, dear," Bernice murmured, her voice quavering. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Yet Ranger refused to move away, his nose nearly brushing the fabric of Bernice's suitcase, as if it held a secret he could scarcely ignore. The onlookers, who had grown curious, formed a small circle, murmuring among themselves. Airport security protocol insisted on swift responses to any K9 alerts, so Claire's colleague Greg arrived, opening the inspection kit. His usual banter died on his lips as he saw Ranger's unwavering stance. That dog seldom erred, and in Claire's experience, an alert like this meant the presence of something truly out of the ordinary. She prepared for potential contraband or worse. As Greg unzipped the suitcase under Claire's watchful gaze, Bernice shifted from foot to foot, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her purse. A slight frown creased her forehead, though she managed a tight smile whenever she caught someone's eye. Clothes neatly folded in pastel colors appeared on top. Soft sweaters, floral blouses, some personal care items. Nothing unusual, Then Greg carefully lifted a layer of clothing to reveal an object wrapped in a plain towel. Ranger's reaction was immediate. A tense, low whine. Claire held her breath. Unwrapping the towel revealed a sealed plastic container. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. Just a small box with a tight lid, taped around the edges. Greg frowned, raising the container to the light. "Doesn't look like drugs," he murmured. "Could be some kind of chemical?" Claire nodded, and they proceeded carefully, slicing through the tape to pry open the lid. Inside, they found a powdery substance sealed within another layer of plastic. "Ma'am," Claire asked gently, "can you explain what this is?" Bernice pressed her lips together, color draining from her cheeks. Her eyes darted from Ranger to Claire, and then to the plastic bag. The older woman inhaled shakily. "It's my husband's ashes," she whispered, her voice trembling. A collective hush fell over the watchers. The last thing anyone anticipated was discovering cremated remains in that container. Claire's initial surge of adrenaline gave way to confusion. Transporting human ashes was not inherently illegal, yet there were strict protocols regarding documentation and secure containers. Something about the dog's intense alert felt incongruous with a benign explanation of simple cremains. Ranger's senses, honed over years of specialized training, rarely fixated without reason. "If these truly are your husband's ashes, do you have the necessary paperwork?" Claire asked carefully. Bernice's hesitance grew. She fumbled through her purse, eventually producing a slightly crumpled document. Greg inspected it, exchanging a perplexed glance with Claire. Technically, the permit looked genuine. Still, something about Bernice's demeanor left them both uneasy. Before Claire could delve deeper, a police officer on airport detail approached. Officer Simone recognized Ranger and nodded respectfully. "Need any assistance?" she asked. Claire explained the situation, feeling a knot of tension in her stomach. Ranger continued to sniff the container, occasionally letting out a low whine as though he sensed something that eluded human perception. Bernice, meanwhile, seemed torn between indignation and fear. "I've done nothing wrong," she insisted, voice breaking. "Harold, my husband, wanted his ashes scattered in the mountains. I'm only honoring his last wish." The sincerity in her eyes was disarming, and yet Claire couldn't shake the feeling that a deeper truth lurked beneath the surface. While the surrounding crowd was ushered along by other security agents, Claire and Officer Simone guided Bernice to a private screening room. They would run additional tests to confirm the substance was indeed what she claimed. Ranger's persistent alert had to be explained somehow. If the remains were harmless, the dog's reaction might reflect some other scent. Then again, Claire had seen criminals attempt to mask illicit materials by mixing them with ashes or other organic matter. "Please just do what you must," Bernice said, slumping into a chair as though the weight of the world rested on her frail shoulders. Her frailty tugged at Claire's conscience, but procedure demanded caution. Just as the tension reached its peak, Claire decided they needed a deeper analysis. The airport's advanced screening lab could run a comprehensive test, but it would require contacting the local police department for permission. Bernice closed her eyes, looking both exhausted and strangely resigned. Ranger whined once more, urging Claire to press on. Whatever lay hidden in those ashes, it was bigger than any routine checkpoint search. A life's final secret was about to unravel, and absolutely nobody could predict the consequences. In the cramped, windowless screening room, the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Claire stood beside Officer Simone, both of them watching Bernice through a small glass panel. The elderly woman sat in a plastic chair, her shoulders bowed as if she carried an unbearable weight. On the tile floor at Claire's side, Ranger remained alert, ears pricked, glancing every so often toward the container of ashes that now lay sealed in a transparent evidence bag on the table. Officer Simone lowered her voice. The initial field test was inconclusive. No obvious narcotics, no known explosives. Whatever's inside that bag, it isn't a straightforward match to anything standard. She paused, then added, though that doesn't mean it's harmless. Greg stepped in from the corridor, shaking droplets of sweat from his brow. I sent the sample for lab analysis, he said. They'll expedite the process. Should have an update in a few hours. He cast a sympathetic look through the glass. She seems frail, Claire. She's asked for water twice, and she mentioned a heart condition. Claire exhaled. All right, let's let her speak. But keep procedure in mind. Ranger's reaction can't be ignored. Carefully unclipping Ranger's leash, she signaled him to stay at her heel. In the months since he'd started working with her, the dog had never provided a false alert. Whatever was going on, Claire refused to let assumptions about Bernice's delicate appearance cloud her judgment. They opened the door and Bernice looked up, eyes anxious behind her thick lenses. The moment they entered, Ranger moved closer, positioning himself watchfully. Claire kept her voice calm. Ma'am, I'm sorry for any distress, she began, but your suitcase and that container triggered our K9's alert. We're following procedure to rule out any risk to passengers or airport staff. Bernice's hands shook as she clasped them in her lap. I understand, she murmured. Ranger, you said. He's very insistent, isn't he? The corners of her mouth turned upward in a trembling attempt at a smile, but tears glistened in her eyes. I don't mean to cause trouble. Harold, my husband, passed away a month ago, and this trip was supposed to honor his last wish. Claire nodded. You must have the right permits to travel with cremated remains, especially when crossing state or country lines. You do have that document, but Ranger is indicating something else may be present. I have to ask, is there anything inside that container besides your husband's ashes? Bernice's expression flickered, a momentary shift that didn't escape Claire. Nothing, she whispered. Why would I lie about something so sacred? Before Claire could respond, Bernice's breathing grew ragged. Alarmed, Officer Simone stepped forward. Ma'am, are you feeling all right? A bead of sweat formed on Bernice's brow. She clutched at her chest, gasping. Instantly, Simone gestured for assistance. Greg reappeared, grabbing a small medical kit. Meanwhile, Claire instructed a nearby paramedic crew to enter. If Bernice was experiencing genuine cardiac distress, they needed to ensure her safety above all else. As paramedics hustled Bernice out on a gurney, Claire felt a pang of guilt. Stress could indeed aggravate a heart condition, but until they received the lab results, there was little she could do. Ranger whimpered softly, and Claire stroked his head. We'll figure this out, boy, she whispered. It might be nothing, or it might be something bigger than we realize. By late afternoon, the sun dipped lower in the sky, sending pale beams through the windows that lined the corridor. Claire stood at her post outside the makeshift command station the airport police had set up. She could sense a ripple of unease among the security team. News of an odd K9 alert on an elderly passenger's luggage spread quickly through the ranks. Some speculated the bag might contain dangerously toxic chemicals. Others believed it might involve stolen valuables mixed with the ashes. Officer Simone approached, a phone pressed to her ear. Right, she said curtly, then hung up. Claire, the local precinct just informed me the lab found traces of a particular chemical that's not typically associated with cremains. Preliminary guess is it's an agent used in old military ordnance, something that can degrade into harmful compounds over time. Claire frowned. You're saying there might be leftover residue from an explosive? Or a component that used to be part of some weapon? It sounded outrageous. Why would an elderly woman carry such a thing, hidden among ashes? Possibly, Simone replied, crossing her arms. They need more time to confirm. The chemical is rare, but it does show up in situations involving repurposed containers. If Bernice stored her husband's ashes in something previously used for contraband or old ammunition, that might explain Ranger's reaction. Claire shook her head, recalling Bernice's trembling words and timid demeanor. Nothing about this lines up. Even if that container were once used to hide contraband, why bring it on a commercial flight? She had to know it would raise suspicion. Simone arched an eyebrow. Unless she didn't know at all. Or there's something else in those ashes that we haven't identified. The lab said the sample is incomplete. They need a bigger portion to run comprehensive tests. Let's talk to Bernice again, Claire decided. She might be frightened, and if she's truly sick, we need to approach carefully, but we have to learn the truth. They made their way to the airport clinic, where Bernice was resting. A small medical team monitored her vitals. She looked pale and exhausted, but her eyes fluttered open as Claire and Simone entered. Ranger remained outside, obediently waiting by the door. The paramedic on duty nodded for them to keep it brief. Claire spoke softly, taking care not to startle her. "Mrs. Wilcox, how are you feeling?" Bernice let out a shaky breath. "Better, dear. They say it was just a palpitation from stress. No real damage this time." Claire hesitated, choosing her words. "The lab found unusual residues in the container. Are you absolutely sure it only held Harold's ashes?" A flicker of panic passed over Bernice's features. "I told you the truth, it's just—" She stopped abruptly, catching herself. Simone's gaze was unwavering, a silent challenge to continue. Bernice swallowed and continued in a faltering tone. "Harold served overseas in his youth. He used to collect old military souvenirs. He never got rid of them. You might have found traces of something from those days." Claire leaned forward. "Why transport it in the same container as the ashes?" Bernice's eyes filled with tears. "Money," she whispered. "I couldn't afford a fancy urn. Harold left me almost nothing, and the funeral costs were so high. His old trunk in the attic had that container. So I cleaned it as best I could." The confession drew pity from Claire, but something still felt off. "Mrs. Wilcox, I don't want to alarm you, but we need to run further tests. If that container once held unstable substances, it could pose a real risk." The older woman nodded. "Do what you must. All I want is to take Harold to the mountains where we spent our honeymoon decades ago. He asked me to scatter his ashes there." Simone's phone buzzed. She glanced down, reading a text. "Lab results are partially back. They found traces of tungsten, sulfur derivatives, and possibly some form of nitrates. It's consistent with old wartime materials." Bernice cradled her face in her hands. "Harold," she whispered, voice cracking. "Oh, Harold, I told you to get rid of all those old relics." Claire's protective instincts flared. She believed Bernice was telling the truth about her ignorance, but this accident still threatened everyone's safety. "We'll keep everything contained until the final results confirm there's no immediate danger," she said gently. "Meanwhile, Mrs. Wilcox, the airline might rebook your flight, but you'll have to stay local until the investigation is done." "Yes, of course," Bernice murmured, a defeated tremor in her voice. "I'll do whatever you need." Leaving Bernice in the care of the medical staff, Claire and Simone headed into the hallway to confer. "If that container was part of a relic with leftover explosive residue," Simone said, "it might be harmless by now, but the question remains, is that truly all there is to this story?" Claire looked down at Ranger, who had been waiting patiently. The dog sniffed the air again, then pressed closer to Claire's side. She could feel the tension in his stance, almost as if he believed there was more to uncover. "I'm not fully convinced," Claire said quietly. "Ranger doesn't usually keep reacting this strongly if there's no present threat. Maybe we're dealing with a chemical that's benign unless triggered, or maybe something else is concealed." Simone pursed her lips. "Do we escalate this? It could end up in a federal inquiry if we suspect hazardous materials." Claire nodded slowly. I want the lab to fully analyze those ashes. If we discover anything else, we'll call in the higher-ups. She glanced back through the clinic window at Bernice, who stared blankly at the walls, lost in her own anguish. For her sake, I hope it's just a sad mistake. But we have to be sure. With Ranger's silent vigilance guiding her next steps, Claire prepared to take the investigation beyond the airport's routine. The truth might lie in Harold Wilcox's mysterious old possessions, or in Bernice's private sorrows. Either way, the dog's unwavering suspicion demanded answers, and if there was indeed more to those ashes than heartbreak and memories, the consequences would ripple far beyond Pinewood International's gates. Just after midnight, the sterile corridors of Pinewood International fell quiet. A few travelers from delayed flights dozed on benches, the hum of industrial lights mingling with distant announcements for last call at the tiny cafe that remained open. Claire walked briskly down a restricted hallway leading to the forensics lab annex, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. Ranger trotted alongside her, nose twitching, as if sensing that something significant lay ahead. Earlier that evening, she had finally convinced the lab technicians to expedite analysis on the remaining ashes from Bernice Wilcox's container. Rumors already circulated. Some whispered that the substance might be leftover explosives. Others speculated about toxic materials. Claire didn't enjoy fueling wild speculation, but Ranger's continued unease made her push for a final, more thorough test. When she reached the lab, an older technician named Harriet Kim stood waiting. Harriet had worked forensic chemistry for decades, her reputation for caution and precision well known among airport staff. She beckoned Claire inside, keeping her voice low. "I've stayed late because I thought you'd want these findings as soon as possible," she said, leading Claire to a cramped office behind the main lab area. Ranger lay down quietly near the doorway, ears perked. Claire observed a laptop on a metal table, its screen filled with graphs and data streams she couldn't fully interpret without Harriet's guidance. "Tell me you found a definitive answer," she said, folding her arms. Harriet sighed. "Yes and no. We identified multiple chemical signatures consistent with old military ordnance, nitrates, tungsten, and compounds that could have been part of a war-era explosive device. However, there's an anomalous reading in the ash itself that doesn't match any typical residue. It suggests something organic, almost biological in nature, that doesn't align with normal cremation remains." Claire frowned. "Biological? Are you saying these might not be human ashes?" Harriet's expression was grim. "The proportion of human ash is there, but it's contaminated with other organic material. The ratio is off, and it's not just traces of dog hair or cat hair. This is something else entirely, and I can't identify it without more specialized equipment." Claire's mind raced. Could Harold Wilcox have stored other sensitive materials in the container, along with his old souvenirs? Or was there a darker explanation? She remembered Bernice's trembling insistence that all she carried was her husband's final remains. "So, someone mixed the ashes with something that isn't human bone residue," Claire ventured. "Could it be smuggled drugs broken down to a biochemical state? Or pathogens?" Harriet rubbed her temples. "Potentially, yes. Some sort of biological agent. I'm not saying it's definitely malicious. It could be medical tissue or rare organic compounds, but until we have the proper testing environment, I can't conclude whether it's dangerous." A knot formed in Claire's stomach. Ranger had caught on to something real, something that even advanced scanners initially missed. "I'll have to inform Officer Simone," she said. "We may need the police department's biocontainment unit, and if that means calling federal agencies, well, so be it." She paused, concern flooding her voice. "Harriet, could it pose a threat to anyone exposed to it?" The technician hesitated. "In theory, if it's inert, maybe no threat, but we don't know for sure. If it's some infectious agent or an engineered compound, it might be dangerous. We can't handle that risk lightly. My advice is to secure the entire sample in a high-level containment facility for further analysis." Claire nodded, stepping out of the office. Ranger rose immediately, sensing her tension. She gave him a calming pat on the side. "Good job, boy," she whispered, wishing she didn't feel an ominous swell of apprehension. All she could picture now was Bernice's frail figure in the airport clinic and the heartbreak that had lined the older woman's face. If Bernice had no idea what she was carrying, this might all be a dreadful, unintended consequence of Harold's hidden past. But if Bernice did know, she shook off that thought. The only option was to proceed carefully and shield the public from any potential danger. After calling Officer Simone, Claire headed toward the clinic, Ranger's soft panting the only sound echoing behind her. When she arrived, the clinic's hallway was dim, the overhead lights turned low for the night. Bernice Wilcox's temporary room sat at the far end. A lone nurse stood at the station. She glanced up, recognized Claire and Ranger, then motioned for them to be quiet. "She was resting," the nurse whispered. "I checked on her 20 minutes ago. She seemed calmer." Claire inclined her head in thanks, continuing silently. At the door, Ranger immediately tensed. He sniffed the seam along the threshold, then let out a soft whine that sent a ripple of alarm through Claire. She carefully opened the door, stepping in. Lamplight revealed the bed, neatly made but empty. A pulse monitor lay discarded on the nightstand. Bernice Wilcox was gone. Claire's heart thumped. "Are you serious?" she muttered under her breath, scanning the room. The small closet stood ajar, revealing Bernice's floral cardigan draped on a hook, as though left behind intentionally. Another piece of clothing lay folded on the chair, alongside a half-eaten packet of crackers, but no sign of Bernice herself or her belongings. Ranger circled the bed, sniffing the sheets. He whimpered again, this time more insistently, as if calling Claire's attention to the suitcase that sat partially concealed beneath the bed frame. Kneeling, she pulled it out. It was the same rose-patterned suitcase from earlier, now lying open and empty. The towels and clothes that once lined it were gone. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. How had Bernice vanished? The clinic staff would have noticed if she simply walked out, especially given her recent scare. Quickly, Claire called out to the nurse. "Did you see her leave, or anyone escort her?" A flustered look crossed the nurse's face. "No, I've been here all night. She couldn't have gone far." Officer Simone arrived within minutes, alerted by Claire's urgent message. She took one look at the empty bed and cursed under her breath. "Did she run, or was she taken?" Simone demanded, striding forward to examine the room. She reached for her radio to call airport security. "I'll have them check cameras right away." Claire motioned for Ranger to sniff around. The dog padded to the doorway, following an invisible trail. His nose worked overtime, and after a moment of hesitation, he started leading them down the corridor. Claire, Simone, and the nurse followed closely, turning corner after corner. The trail led to a side stairwell rarely used by passengers, but occasionally accessed by staff. Within the stairwell, Ranger's paw steps clicked on the concrete steps. He descended 2 floors, sniffing at every landing. Finally, near a door leading to one of the airport's older maintenance wings, he paused, scratching at the base. Simone hurried forward and tried the handle. It was locked. Quickly, she radioed for a spare key. Moments later, the door swung open with a creak. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, stacked with boxes of spare parts and seldom-used cleaning machines. Ranger forged ahead, nose down, until he reached a half-open maintenance closet. He froze, hackles rising, then emitted a small bark. Cautiously, Claire and Simone stepped forward. Inside the closet, they found a hospital gown discarded on the floor. Next to it lay a pair of sensible shoes, Bernice's size, presumably left behind in haste. No sign of Bernice. Simone's phone vibrated. She answered, listening with a look of frustration. Camera footage is spotty in this area. There's a side door leading to a service driveway. Looks like it's missing a functioning camera. She shook her head. Bernice slipped out of the clinic and either left the airport or is hiding somewhere on the grounds. An uneasy silence settled between them. Claire called Harriet in the forensics lab, explaining the new turn of events. Harriet's voice crackled with urgency on the line. "Claire, if she left with any additional portion of those ashes, we're dealing with an unaccounted substance that could be hazardous." "That's what I was afraid of," Claire replied, teeth clenched. "We'll widen the search." With the entire airport complex placed on alert, a full-scale operation commenced. Patrols roamed the parking lots and service roads. Announcements directed staff to report any sight of an older woman fitting Bernice's description. Simone and Claire checked the bus terminals outside. Meanwhile, Ranger continued to sniff out potential clues in the maintenance tunnels. An hour passed, then 2, yet no trace of Bernice emerged. Close to 3 in the morning, exhausted and worried, Claire reconvened with Simone near the main security desk. They found Greg there, rubbing his eyes, staring at a screen of rotating camera feeds. "Still no sign," he said glumly, stifling a yawn. "It's like she vanished into thin air." Claire sank into a chair. Her suitcase was left. "The container is in our possession, but who knows if there's more of that stuff hidden somewhere." She cringed at the memory of Harriet's words about unidentified organic material. A final wave of guilt washed over her. Bernice was ill, possibly confused, yet she'd managed to slip away so neatly. Could she have gotten into a taxi, or is someone helping her? Officer Simone nodded. "We'll run checks on local taxis, but it's late. Not many cabs wait around at this hour. She might be hiding somewhere until daylight, or maybe she arranged a ride." Greg's eyes flicked to Ranger. "He still thinks there's something here?" Claire looked at her dog, whose ears drooped in fatigue. "He hasn't stopped being restless. My gut says we're missing a key piece. Bernice's story about her husband's military relics may be true, but now we know those ashes aren't purely what she claimed." She rubbed her temples, trying to piece together the puzzle. "There's a reason she ran. Could be fear, could be guilt." Simone exhaled sharply. "We'll keep searching. Sooner or later, someone will spot her." But as the clock ticked toward dawn, with the airport staff weary and the trail gone cold, Claire couldn't help but sense that Bernice Wilcox was more determined and more resourceful than anyone had given her credit for. And until they found her, the mystery of the ashes remained unresolved, looming like a dark cloud over Pinewood International. The first pale light of morning found Claire slumped in a break-room chair, a tepid cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd spent the last few hours combing through flight manifests, interviewing night staff, and scouring endless camera footage, but the result was always the same. Bernice Wilcox had vanished. Even the traces Ranger tried to follow led to dead ends. Airport staff, though sympathetic, were exhausted. No one could fathom how a frail elderly woman had managed to slip away so neatly, especially while supposedly recovering from a heart scare. At dawn, Officer Simone dropped a summary on the table. No reported sightings in the parking structures, no requests for medical help from local clinics, and no flagged credit card transactions under Bernice's name. Simone tapped a pen on the tabletop, fatigue etched on her face. "One theory is that she's hidden somewhere in the airport, waiting until things calm down. Another is that she had help." She paused, eyeing Claire. "We don't know which, but we can't keep the whole airport on lockdown forever." Ranger lay at Claire's feet, head propped on his paws, eyes half-lidded with weariness. He'd been working nonstop all night, sniffing every corridor, closet, and deserted gate. Claire ran a hand gently over his ears, feeling an almost overwhelming gratitude for his unwavering dedication. If Bernice left airport grounds, we should have footage from the main exits, the plates scanned by cameras, the cabs recorded on video. She flipped open a folder. But from midnight to 2 a.m., the system near the service driveway was practically non-functional. She could have left in any vehicle and we'd never know. Simone drummed her fingers in agitation. So either she slipped out during that gap or she's still somewhere inside. The real question is why. Is she scared we'll confiscate her husband's ashes? Or is there something more sinister, like she's terrified we'll find out a truth she's hiding? Just then, Greg stepped into the break room, lugging 2 stacks of printouts. His usual good humor was replaced by grim focus. I cross-checked hospital admissions in a 20-mile radius. No one named Bernice Wilcox. Also, no older women fitting her description checked in overnight. Claire pressed her lips together in frustration. We might need to look for an alias, or maybe she's with a friend. She glanced at Bernice's file. Her ID lists an address in Westbridge. We're sure she has no family around here? Greg shrugged. Records show no living children. A distant cousin in another state, but that's all I got. Ranger stirred, letting out a light whine as if sensing their frustration. Claire took a breath. All right, let's redirect our energies. Harriet's more thorough analysis found some suspicious organic residue. That triggered Ranger's initial alert. We should figure out what exactly Harold Wilcox was mixed up in. If it's contraband that's dangerous, time is of the essence. Simone nodded, tapping a pen against her notes. We can request the husband's military records, see if that reveals anything. Maybe he had access to substances that shouldn't be lying around. Greg's phone chimed and he took the call. A grim look settled on his face. That was Harriet. She wants us in the lab. Something else came up about that organic material. They followed him to the forensic annex, the halls echoing beneath their hurried steps. Harriet awaited them, fatigue evident in her eyes. She led them to her cramped office, where a microscope was hooked to a computer monitor. We found traces of old explosive residue, she explained, but there's also an unknown organic component in the ashes. Claire's stomach tightened. Unknown in what sense? Harriet clicked through magnified images on the screen. I can't identify its nature with our equipment. It might be a fungus or spore-based agent, possibly harmless, but I can't rule out something engineered or hazardous. We'll need a specialized lab to confirm. Simone expelled a slow breath. If Bernice is wandering around with something like that, we have a potential threat. Harriet nodded gravely. The rest of the ashes are locked away here, but if she took more with her, it could pose a risk. The tension in Claire's chest mounted. We have to contact the local police or maybe higher authorities. Whatever's in that sample, it's more than residue from old wartime gear. Simone got on her radio, quickly briefing her superior. Within the hour, a specialized hazmat team was en route, prepared to handle whatever Harriet discovered. Claire pictured Bernice's face, so full of sorrow, and wondered how the woman had ended up caught in such a nightmare. Whether it was by accident or design, she was gone, carrying who knows what in the process. By mid-morning, the hush of the airport gave way to the bustle of new flights. Claire could see the confusion in travelers' faces as uniformed officers combed every nook and cranny. Announcements over the PA system were cryptic, but insistent about reporting anything suspicious. Ranger, despite his own fatigue, continued patrolling the perimeter near the maintenance areas. In the main security office, Claire debriefed the newly arrived hazmat team, led by a no-nonsense man in a sealed protective suit named Captain Ortega. He listened intently. So we secure the remains you have, he said. Any leads on the missing passenger? Simone shook her head. She's basically evaporated. We have no vehicle records, no family, no sign of her in local hospitals. Ortega's gaze hardened. If she still has some portion of this fungus, assuming that's what it is, she's potentially a walking biohazard. Keep me posted. We'll do a containment transfer on your sample, then run advanced tests off-site. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. With that, the hazmat unit vanished down the hallway, leaving Claire and Simone to regroup. Let's see if local PD found anything, Claire suggested, heading to a quieter corner of the office. Over the phone, a sergeant from the local station confirmed they had officers searching bus terminals and train stations. So far, no luck. Greg showed up again, frustration evident in his posture. None of the rummaging through passenger logs turned up anything. She wasn't listed on any outgoing flights after her disappearance. Ranger, splayed on the floor, lifted his head and let out a tired huff. Claire couldn't help but feel sympathy for him, and for Bernice. It was possible she was lost, confused, or even more gravely ill than anyone realized. Yet the chilling possibility lingered. Maybe she was hiding on purpose, determined to fulfill some final vow to her husband, even if it put others at risk. By noon, the sun blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the concern etched into every officer's face. Claire's phone buzzed. She checked the caller ID. Harriet. "Hey," she answered, stepping away for privacy. Harriet's voice was tense. "I just got a preliminary read from a contact at the state lab. They suspect these might be genetically modified spores. Low level, but possibly stable enough to remain active. This is serious, Claire. If Bernice has more in her possession, the potential fallout is unknown." Claire squeezed her eyes shut, then nodded, though Harriet couldn't see her. "Understood. Keep me updated. We're searching everywhere." She relayed Harriet's update to Simone and Greg. They exchanged looks that spelled trouble. Simone spoke first. "I'm going to loop in the city's public health department. We can't risk this turning into a crisis if those spores spread in the wrong environment." Greg typed frantically on his phone. "On it. I'll also recheck hotels near the bus depot." She could have used a different name, paying cash, but maybe a clerk recalls an older woman with health issues. Claire knelt by Ranger, gently running her hand over his fur. "All right, boy, we'll figure this out. We just need the right lead." She glanced at Simone. "I have a feeling that Harold's old service connections might hold the key. Let's talk to Westbridge locals, see if they remember anything about his past." They loaded Ranger into Simone's cruiser and made the 2-hour trip to Westbridge, a sleepy town at the foothills of the Blue Pine Mountains. The drive was tense, but the rolling hills and scattered evergreens offered a peaceful contrast to the stress. "If Bernice truly wants to scatter ashes in the mountains," Claire mused, "she could be headed there. She told me it was Harold's wish." Simone, eyes on the road, nodded. "The question is whether she's traveling alone. She's older, not in the best health. That means she either arranged help or she's pushing herself to the brink." They arrived at Westbridge by late afternoon, heading to the local police station. The desk officer recognized Harold Wilcox's name. "He owned a small house near the edge of town," the officer said. "Widow left about a month ago. Funeral arrangements, I think, but folks here remember them well enough." After gathering directions, Claire and Simone found the modest property, an aging bungalow with a wraparound porch. A neighbor, an older man in worn overalls, confirmed that Bernice was seldom visited by anyone, though she spoke fondly of the distant mountains. Said something about a promise to scatter Harold's ashes in a hidden meadow up there, he recalled. He used to trek the trails collecting plants. Odd guy, but kind. She might have gone to fulfill that vow. Dark clouds gathered overhead as they left, an uneasy hush falling on the street. If Bernice was up in those mountains, possibly alone, hauling some dangerous fungal spores, the implications were troubling. Without official confirmation, though, Claire couldn't call in a helicopter or mount a massive rescue. That meadow could be anywhere, Simone said, frustration creeping into her voice. And if she's physically frail, time's running out. Claire looked at Ranger, who peered through the car window, ears perked. If they found even a faint scent of Bernice, he might lead them straight to her. But first, they needed to confirm she had gone there at all, and with each passing hour, the sense of dread grew. Somewhere, an elderly widow was clutching her husband's ashes, carrying secrets no one could fully comprehend. And the entire region might be on the brink of a biological threat, all triggered by one dog's extraordinary nose and one widow's desperate determination. Torrential rain hammered the roof of the Westbridge police station, turning the narrow streets into shallow rivers. Claire stood by a window streaked with rivulets, listening to the relentless drumming overhead. Between the sudden downpours and the deepening mystery surrounding Bernice Wilcox, tension pressed down on her like an invisible weight. Officer Simone, equally on edge, conferred with the local deputies in hushed tones. Meanwhile, Ranger lay at Claire's feet, occasionally lifting his head to peer out at the deluge. Captain Taylor, the local police chief, emerged from a back office with a handful of files in his grip. He was a solidly built man in his 50s, a hint of gray in his close-cropped hair. He approached Claire and Simone, setting the paperwork down on a nearby desk. "My team spoke with older residents who remember Harold Wilcox," he said, voice low. "According to them, Harold once mentioned a remote hiking trail leading to an unmarked meadow in the mountains. It's not on any official map." Simone flipped through the documents, scanning the typed notes. "This meadow seems to be a family secret," she murmured. "He told a few close friends about it, saying it was where he proposed to Bernice decades ago." She looked up at Claire. If Bernice wants to fulfill her husband's wish, maybe that's the spot. Claire's gaze shifted to the window, where relentless sheets of rain pounded the glass. "Great timing. We've got a storm, a missing widow with a heart condition, and a potential biohazard in her possession." Her anxiety gnawed at her. If Bernice was up in those mountains, alone and unprepared, the danger extended far beyond the mysterious spores. Slippery trails and flash floods could trap or injure her, yet the sense of urgency was equally driven by Harriet's warnings. If those modified spores escaped into damp soil, the consequences might spiral beyond control. Captain Taylor cleared his throat. "There's a small group of volunteer rescue climbers in Westbridge. They know these mountains better than anyone. We could ask them to guide you. But we're dealing with rough terrain and zero visibility until this storm eases. My guess is we'll have a tiny weather window later this afternoon, then heavy rainfall again by nightfall." Simone furrowed her brow. "So we either mobilize a team as soon as the rain lessens, or risk waiting too long." She glanced at Claire and Ranger. "What do you think?" Claire crouched, meeting Ranger's eyes. The dog seemed tired from the previous day's search, but she knew his drive wouldn't falter. "We have to try," she said firmly. "If Bernice is set on reaching that meadow, we can't wait until tomorrow. Every hour we delay is another hour she's out there, possibly in danger, and carrying a substance we still don't understand." Taylor nodded. "I'll gather the rescue volunteers at the station in 2 hours. They have off-road vehicles to handle the back roads leading up the mountain. We'll see how far we can go before we have to continue on foot." Claire checked her watch. Morning had slipped by while they gathered intel. She turned to Simone. "We should gear up. Wet weather outfits. Enough supplies for a night if we get stranded, plus a way to protect Ranger from the worst of it." She hesitated. "If Harriet's suspicions are correct, we also need some minimal protective gear in case we come into contact with those spores." Simone pressed her lips together. "We'll wear masks and gloves. Let's not alarm the rescue team with hazmat suits. They might refuse to go, but I'll explain it's a possible chemical risk so they remain cautious." They split up to prepare. Claire walked Ranger through the station's corridors, looking for any leftover snacks or water to keep him energized. The dog's posture remained alert, as though he knew a new phase of the hunt lay ahead. She patted his flank gently. "You're the best partner I could ask for," she whispered. "Let's find her." An hour later, the storm's fury diminished, transforming into a steady drizzle. Captain Taylor introduced Claire and Simone to two volunteer rescuers waiting by a pair of rugged four-wheel drives in the station's lot. The first was Elena Ramirez, a seasoned local hiker with decades of experience on these trails. She had weathered skin, sharp eyes, and an easy confidence that suggested no terrain was too daunting. The second was Tim Hardy, a younger man, perhaps in his mid-20s, who wore a climbing harness even now, as though he lived for the next scramble up steep cliffs. "We'll head up the logging road near Willow Creek," Elena explained, pointing at a map in the drizzle. "After that, the trail's unmarked, so we rely on memory and local knowledge. If Bernice wanted a secret meadow, Harold must have taken her to one of these remote clearings. I suspect it's near Laurel Peak because that area stays quiet. Tourists rarely go there." Tim nodded. "The main problem is flash flooding. The streams might swell in this weather, and the ground becomes mud. We'll have to park the vehicles well below the trailhead and hike the rest." Simone passed around face masks and gloves, offering them without going into excessive detail. "We suspect Bernice may be carrying something hazardous," she said carefully. "It's a relic from her husband's service days, no immediate danger if we're cautious, but better to protect ourselves." Her no-nonsense tone discouraged questions. Before setting out, Claire let Ranger sniff a scarf belonging to Bernice, which a Westbridge neighbor had found in an old trunk. The dog's nostrils flared, ears pricking with recognition. He looked toward the mountains, as though impatient to begin. Claire felt a surge of hope. If Bernice was truly out there, Ranger might be their best chance of finding her quickly. They loaded up, 2 in each vehicle. Claire rode with Elena and Ranger, while Simone and Tim took the second truck. The narrow road out of town soon turned into a gravel track that led higher and higher into mist-shrouded pines. Rain battered the windshield sporadically, but at least the deluge had eased from earlier. Elena navigated with practiced confidence, avoiding deep ruts and fallen branches. Along the way, they saw evidence of the storm's power. Small landslides had turned sections of the hillside into muddy slopes, and uprooted saplings littered the roadside. Claire worried about how an elderly woman could traverse such terrain, yet the possibility that Bernice might be driven by a fierce determination to honor her husband's final wish kept them pressing forward. Eventually, Elena parked at a clearing where the road ended abruptly, blocked by a collapsed footbridge over a turbulent stream. Tim pulled up behind them, stepping out to gauge the water's depth. "It's almost waist-high," he reported, wincing at the cold rush. "We'll have to cross carefully upstream where it's shallower." Simone and Claire donned rain jackets, masks, and gloves. Elena handed them trekking poles. "We'll pick our path. I know a safer crossing about a quarter mile from here, but it's tricky under these conditions." Claire nodded, grateful for Elena's expertise. They set off on foot. Ranger splashed eagerly alongside Claire, shaking droplets off his coat every few steps. The forest closed in around them, dark and dripping, the scent of wet pine laced with earthy decay. Overhead, thick clouds churned with the threat of another downpour. Tim scouted ahead, occasionally calling back directions. Elena walked behind them, scanning the surroundings for recognizable landmarks, boulders, certain tree formations, or anything that might confirm they were on the right track. When they found the shallow crossing, the water still tugged fiercely at their legs. Tim secured a rope to a sturdy trunk, and they used it as a guide to shuffle carefully across the stream, holding Ranger's harness to help him keep balance. After a tense few minutes, everyone made it to the other side, soaked but safe. Elena consulted her mental map. "We're maybe a mile below Laurel Peak. The meadow, I suspect, is further up. maybe another half-mile off the main route. They pressed on. The climb grew steeper, each step sucking at their boots in the mud. At times, Tim had to hack through thick undergrowth with a machete, revealing an overgrown path that likely hadn't been used in years. Branches whipped across their rain gear. Ranger paused repeatedly to sniff the air, then continued, tail held high. Claire's heart pounded with exertion, her mask feeling clammy. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that they were closing in on something important. Finally, the trees thinned, opening onto a small clearing. At the far end stood a single gnarled pine with twisting roots that created a kind of natural bench. The surrounding grass was flattened in patches, as though recently trodden. Ranger jerked forward, straining at his leash, then dashed toward the pine. Claire followed, her breath catching as she saw footprints in the mud, small, seemingly from a woman's shoe. Near the base of the pine, something lay half-buried by wet leaves, a small plastic water bottle. Claire picked it up with gloved hands. Faded letters spelled out a convenience store logo. The water inside was partly gone. "Could be hers," Claire said, pulse quickening. "She might have rested here." Helena nodded, scanning the horizon. Beyond the meadow, the ground sloped upward into rocky outcroppings. "There's a vantage point just over that ridge. If Bernice wanted a dramatic place to scatter ashes, that might be it. Locals call it Eagle's Crest. The wind up there is fierce, so it's a prime spot for releasing anything into the air." Alarm prickled the back of Claire's neck. If Bernice had managed to climb that far, she could already have scattered the ashes, potentially releasing unknown spores into the environment. Claire glanced at Simone, who looked equally concerned. "We have to find her before she tries anything," Simone said. "Or before the storm catches her off guard. Let's go." Ranger led the way, nose quivering. The path turned treacherous, littered with slippery stones. Tim occasionally offered a hand to Claire, and Elena guided Simone around slick patches. They pressed on despite the wind's renewed fury, damp hair plastered to their foreheads beneath hoods. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance, a warning of storms creeping closer. As they rounded a final boulder, the land opened dramatically. A sheer drop fell away to reveal miles of forest beneath a leaden sky. At the crest stood a lone figure, shoulders stooped, clutching something in her arms. Claire's heart clenched with a surge of relief and dread. Bernice Wilcox had reached Eagle's Crest. Bernice stood at the rocky edge of Eagle's Crest, buffeted by gusts of wind that tugged at her thin raincoat. Even from a distance, Claire could see how the older woman's body trembled. Whether it was from cold, exhaustion, or sheer anxiety, no one could tell. But in her hands, clutched like a sacred treasure, rested a plastic container sealed with layers of tape. The same container Ranger had identified back at the airport, the one now believed to contain an unknown mix of Harold Wilcox's ashes and ominous spores. Claire signaled for everyone to stop. Elena and Tim stayed several paces behind, trying to keep a low profile so as not to startle Bernice. Officer Simone, panting slightly from the scramble over the wet rocks, stepped forward to flank Claire. Ranger stood between them, ears flattened by the mountain wind, his stance tense. The dog's gaze never left Bernice's figure. "Bernice!" Claire called, raising her voice above the rumble of distant thunder. She kept her tone calm, trying to convey safety rather than confrontation. "We've come to help. The storm is getting worse." Slowly, Bernice turned. Strands of her silver hair blew across her face, and moisture glistened on her cheeks. Claire couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. "Stay back," Bernice said, her voice cracked with strain. "This is where Harold and I shared our happiest memory. I won't let you stop me from granting his final wish." Simone cleared her throat. "Mrs. Wilcox, we're not here to punish you. We know these ashes are precious to you, but there's a risk. There could be something dangerous mixed in. We need to make sure nobody gets hurt." Bernice shook her head, clutching the container tighter. Dangerous. Harold never would have done anything to harm anyone. He was a gentle soul. She glanced at the swirling clouds, then back at Claire. Her voice faltered. I admit, I discovered the container hidden in his trunk after he died. I was shocked to find his old war medals alongside strange canisters marked with warnings, but I never thought they could still pose a threat. Claire took a cautious step forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. She felt the sharp sting of rain on her face, the wind trying to shove her sideways. Please, let me come closer. The ground is slippery. We don't want you to fall. For a moment, Bernice eyed Claire warily. Then, with a faint nod, she allowed the approach. Claire inched forward, Simone at her side, Ranger trailing slightly behind them. When she was close enough to see the lines of exhaustion etched on Bernice's face, Claire spoke gently. We believe the ashes were mixed with something that might be biologically active. If you release them here, in this damp environment, you could spread something harmful. We just want to test them more thoroughly for everyone's safety, including yours. Bernice's eyes flicked to Simone, then to Ranger, who was watching her with a solemn calm. That dog, she whispered. He was so insistent. And all of you, with your labs and concerns. But Harold told me stories about how he was involved in research while stationed overseas. He said it was top secret, but that it never amounted to anything. I suppose I should have asked more questions. Simone ventured closer. Her voice softened, though it remained resolute. It's not your fault. You couldn't have known the full extent. But think about the memories you want to honor. Do you truly believe Harold would want you risking your own life or the safety of others just to scatter his ashes in this storm? Bernice's grip on the container loosened fractionally. She stared at it as though torn between devotion and doubt. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the craggy cliffs and the swirling mist around them. In that electric silence, Claire thought she saw Bernice's resolve waver. Then a sharp crack of thunder exploded overhead. The noise startled Bernice so fiercely that she stumbled backward, shoes skidding on the slick stone. Claire and Simone both lunged forward. Bernice cried out, teetering at the ledge. With a desperate burst of strength, Claire caught Bernice's arm just in time, yanking her away from the precipice. The container slipped from Bernice's grasp, bouncing once on the rocky ground before rolling perilously close to the edge. Ranger reacted instantly, dashing after the container. Claire's heart lurched at the sight of him so near the cliff's drop. She froze, torn between tending to Bernice and calling for the dog to back off. But Ranger, agile even on slippery terrain, managed to clamp his jaws gently around the container without puncturing it. In a few bounding steps, he retreated from the edge and dropped it at Claire's feet, letting out a short, relieved bark. Bernice sank to her knees, breath ragged, her eyes flooded with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't mean... I never wanted to hurt anyone." Claire swallowed hard, checking that Bernice was securely on flat ground. She motioned for Simone to help the older woman stand. "It's okay," Claire murmured. "You're safe. Just let us keep you that way." Lightning flashed again, followed by a steady roll of thunder. The sky darkened further. Tim and Elena appeared behind them, drawn by the commotion. Tim cupped his hands to shout over the rising wind. "We need to head back now. The storm's picking up fast." Simone slipped an arm around Bernice, guiding her away from the cliff edge. Bernice clung to the officer's sturdy presence, her soaked clothes plastered to her frail frame. Claire cradled the container in gloved hands, heart pounding. The taped lid was intact, but the near disaster rattled her. Had it fallen into the valley below, the threat of releasing unknown spores into the environment would have been terrifyingly real. Under Elena's direction, they moved quickly, retracing their path across the slippery rocks. Tim led the way, hacking through the underbrush with swift, sure strikes. Ranger stayed glued to Claire's side, occasionally looking up at her as though to confirm everything was all right. The wind whipped fallen pine needles around them, stinging any exposed skin. Bernice stumbled repeatedly, her breath ragged, but she never asked to stop. Down at the meadow, the rain returned in sheets, making it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. Elena and Tim exchanged worried glances. If the water level's risen at the stream, crossing back will be tougher than before, Elena said, wiping rain from her brow. Let's hurry. They descended the path in tense silence, the wind roaring overhead. By the time they reached the stream, it was indeed higher, churning white rapids where they'd once crossed. Tim tried wading in, only to gasp as the current nearly swept him off his feet. The rope they'd used earlier had washed away. They retreated to the bank, forming a huddle. "We might have to go upstream until we find a safer crossing," Elena shouted over the torrent. "Or try waiting out the worst of it, though that could mean hours in the rain." Bernice coughed. Her wet hair clung to her face. I'm sorry," she mumbled. "I caused so much trouble." Claire looked at the older woman, then at Simone. They both recognized that Bernice needed shelter fast. "What are our options?" Claire asked Elena, scanning the drenched terrain. Elena pointed upstream. "There's an abandoned ranger cabin about half a mile that way. If we can make it, we'll at least have a roof over our heads. The trail is rough, but better than risking a drowning here." Simone nodded sharply. "Lead on, then. We'll reevaluate once we're under cover." They followed Elena, forging through brambles and soaked vegetation. Each step felt heavier than the last, mud sucking at their boots. Bernice's legs trembled from cold and fatigue. Claire took the container from Ranger to keep it sealed within her vest's waterproof pocket, ensuring it stayed in one piece. If Harriet's findings were correct, they still faced an enormous responsibility to turn it over to the hazmat unit. For now, though, survival came first. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the path, enough for Elena to spot the faint outline of a small structure hidden among pines. Over the howl of wind, Tim let out a triumphant shout. A minute later, they reached the weathered cabin. It was no bigger than a tool shed with cracks in the wooden walls and a collapsed porch, but it had a roof and, mercifully, a door that still latched. The group stumbled inside, water streaming off their clothes. Tim set about clearing debris from the corner, while Elena found a tattered tarp they could spread on the floor. Simone guided Bernice to sit on a makeshift bench. Ranger sniffed around, quietly exploring. Claire dug out a flashlight from her pack, shining it around to confirm no dangerous animals or structural hazards lurked in the gloom. The cabin smelled of damp wood and old leaves, but it was better than braving the storm outside. Breathing hard, Claire finally sank onto the tarp. She placed the container carefully at her side, removing her gloves to flex numb fingers. Ranger settled near her, nudging her boot as though asking for reassurance. Outside, thunder continued to rumble, and rain drummed relentlessly on the cabin roof. Bernice pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. "I'm so sorry," she said again, voice choked with remorse. "Harold wanted this, but I never considered what else might be in there. I just wanted to do right by him." Claire met her gaze, sympathy and caution mingling in her own expression. "We understand that, and I promise we'll do everything we can to help. But first, we all need to get through this storm and keep that container closed until we know exactly what's inside." As though echoing her words, the wind rattled the cabin door, sending a chill gust through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the storm grew fiercer by the minute, leaving them stranded for now. They had what they came for, Bernice and the ashes. Yet the greatest challenges might still await them in the next few hours. when they would have to find a way out of the mountains and hand over that mysterious container before any further harm could unfold. Thunder roared in the distance, punctuating the patter of rain on the cabin's battered roof. Inside, the air felt thick with tension and a rising sense of claustrophobia. Claire kept her flashlight pointed at the warped floorboards, while Tim lit 2 small lanterns he'd found in a corner. Their soft glow revealed damp walls, a broken-down stove, and a half-rotten table pressed against the far wall. Ranger padded over to sniff the debris. He sneezed at the musty odor, then trotted back to Claire with a look that seemed to say, "At least we're out of the downpour." Bernice shivered on the makeshift bench. Simone crouched beside her, handing over a foil emergency blanket from her pack. "Wrap yourself in this," she instructed quietly. The older woman clutched the metallic sheet with trembling hands, her face pale. "I can't believe how foolish I was," Bernice murmured. "In my eagerness to honor Harold's wishes, I never questioned what he might have done with that container. He never spoke about the details of his service, only that he worked on classified experiments. I assumed it was all behind him, behind us." Outside, lightning illuminated the cabin's small window for an instant, revealing walls of dark pines bending under the wind. Elena shook her head, water droplets flinging from her hair. "We'll try to radio out," she said, crossing to Tim, who was fiddling with a portable transmitter. "But we're so high up and these storm clouds are thick. We might not get a signal until the weather breaks." Tim powered up the device, but only static hissed back at him. With a grim nod, he gave Elena a helpless shrug. Simone caught Claire's eye. They both understood the implications. The police and hazmat teams would be frantic for an update, yet any rescue attempt to reach this remote cabin in a raging storm would be nearly impossible. The single road was blocked by high water, and the steep route to the meadow barely allowed foot passage. They were on their own for the time being, with no way to hand over the container. Claire felt the weight of it inside her waterproof vest, as if it held the secrets of an entire era. She thought of Harriet's warnings, spores that could be harmless or devastating. Elena, always practical, retrieved a battered kettle from a shelf. "Tim, see if you can collect some of that rainwater," she said, nodding toward the cabin's leaky corner. "We might be here longer than expected. Boil it if we can get the stove working." Tim tried igniting the old stovetop, but nothing happened. He rummaged around, eventually finding a small camping burner in a rusted cabinet. Within minutes, they'd rigged a makeshift cooking station, the faint hiss of gas reassuring in its normalcy. Claire stepped away to check on Bernice again, rummaging in her pack for extra socks. She offered them to the trembling widow. "These are dry. Put them on. Keep your feet warm." Bernice accepted with a watery smile. "Thank you, dear. You're all being so kind, even after the trouble I caused." Simone settled next to her, shining a lantern on the floor so Bernice could see to remove her soaked shoes. "It's not kindness alone," Simone said gently, "but necessity. We want you safe, Mrs. Wilcox, and we need to keep that container secure until we can bring it to specialists." Bernice nodded miserably, tears shining on her lashes. "I wish Harold had trusted me enough to share whatever burden he carried. We married so young, and when he returned from overseas, he was changed, reserved. It never occurred to me that his old research might still haunt him in death." She pressed a hand over her eyes. "If I'd told the funeral director about the container, or at least had it checked properly, none of this would be happening." Lightning flared again, followed by thunder so loud it vibrated the walls. Ranger let out a short bark, turning his head sharply. The dog's instincts were on high alert, though the cabin provided some shelter from the worst of the storm. Claire, unsettled, rose to her feet, checking the cracks in the door to ensure no water seeped inside. At least the structure seemed stable enough to withstand the gale. Elena announced that the water was heating. The promise of something warm boosted morale, albeit slightly. Tim huddled near the burner, rubbing his hands. "We'll rest until the rain dies down. Maybe by dusk or tomorrow morning we can try that crossing again, or find a better route." Claire nodded, though her thoughts remained tangled. Each hour they spent stranded in the cabin was another hour Harriet's suspicions loomed over them. If the spores were truly dangerous, time was not on their side. They settled into a tense silence. The cabin's cramped interior forced them into close quarters. Bernice dozed fitfully, wrapped in the emergency blanket, while Simone kept a gentle watch over her. Elena and Tim organized gear in a corner, their voices hushed. Claire perched on an overturned crate, Ranger curled at her feet. The dog's presence, warm and reassuring, eased the dread that crept in with every rumble of thunder. In her mind, Claire played through the events that led them here. The airport checkpoint, Ranger's initial alert, the lab's discovery of unusual compounds. Had Harold Wilcox knowingly stolen or preserved something from his service? Or was he merely a pawn in some forgotten project? Regardless, Bernice was entangled in a web of secrets she scarcely understood. Claire wondered what would happen once the authorities gained full possession of those ashes. Would they be locked away in a high-security lab, leaving Bernice with no chance to honor Harold's final request in a gentler manner? Her thoughts circled back to Harriet's ominous findings. If the spores were stable, maybe the threat was minimal. But if they interacted with the environment, especially in a damp climate, it could trigger a microbial bloom. The last thing Claire wanted was an ecological hazard linked to an airport fiasco. She stared at the container in her vest, recalling the moment Ranger rescued it from tumbling over the cliff. That single heroic act had quite possibly saved more than just Bernice's memory of Harold. Footsteps behind her jarred her from her reverie. Tim approached, handing her a steaming mug of boiled water, which still carried a faint woody smell. "It's not gourmet," he said with a wan smile, "but it's hot." Claire thanked him, sipping carefully. The warmth calmed her jangled nerves. "We'll get out of here," Tim added, trying to reassure her. "I've dealt with mountain storms before. They rarely last more than a day or two at full strength." A day or two. The words sank into Claire's mind like stones. Would the hazmat team wait that long? Could Bernice endure these conditions given her heart issues? Claire glanced at Simone, who was checking Bernice's pulse. A furrow in Simone's brow told Claire that Bernice's condition might be precarious. She might need real medical care sooner rather than later. Elena joined them, hair plastered to her scalp. "I tried again to get a signal," she said, brandishing the portable transmitter, "but still nothing. The storms up here are savage, messing with any radio waves." She peered at Claire. "What's our next step if this weather doesn't let up by nightfall?" Claire set her mug down. "We keep Bernice warm, keep the container safe, and hope the storm relents. If it doesn't, we might have to chance a nighttime crossing. But that's a last resort." She shuddered at the idea of stumbling through a flooded stream in the dark, especially with an elderly woman in tow. Outside, the wind roared afresh, rattling loose boards on the cabin wall. A single gust swept through a crack, causing the lantern flame to waver. Claire heard Bernice stir, muttering something in her sleep. She and Simone exchanged worried glances, then moved to check on her. The older woman's skin felt clammy, her breathing uneven. "She's exhausted," Simone said softly. "The stress, the climb, her heart condition, it's all taking a toll." Claire gently touched Bernice's wrist. The pulse fluttered. "We'll get her through this," Claire whispered, ignoring the heaviness in her own chest. "We have to." Time crawled. Outside, the storm refused to yield, raging with renewed ferocity as the afternoon wore on. Flashes of lightning illuminated the cabin's interior at intervals, each burst revealing the tense faces of those huddled inside. Ranger remained vigilant, occasionally standing to circle the small space, then returning to rest at Claire's side. She patted his flank whenever a crash of thunder startled him. Eventually, Bernice came fully awake. In the flickering lamplight, her features looked drawn, yet a hint of determination filled her eyes. "I know you all think I was reckless," she said, voice a mere croak. "And you're right. But Harold was all I had. His last request mattered so much." Tears welled in her eyes and she turned away, embarrassed. Simone placed a gentle hand on Bernice's shoulder. "We understand," she assured her, voice hushed. "Nobody's blaming you for loving your husband. We just have to ensure we handle everything safely." Bernice nodded, wiping her eyes with the edge of the foil blanket. She turned to Claire. "If these spores are truly dangerous, I'll cooperate with whatever protocol is necessary, but if they're not, if it turns out to be harmless, please, let me give Harold the peaceful farewell he deserves." Claire felt a stab of empathy. "We'll do everything we can. Let's get through this storm, get you to a doctor, and test the ashes in a proper lab. Then we'll figure out the rest." A tremor shook Bernice's shoulders, whether from cold or raw emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, the thunder cracked again as if underscoring the gravity of the moment. The group exchanged glances, a silent consensus that, for now, all they could do was wait. Yet even in that cramped, broken cabin, hope flickered like the lantern's glow. They had Bernice. They had the container. And, with luck, they still had enough time to prevent a calamity no one had foreseen. Dusk settled over the mountains in a bruised palette of purples and grays. Inside the battered ranger cabin, the lanterns flickered as the wind bellowed through the pines. The storm had not abated. If anything, it raged with more relentless force, lashing the wooden walls with sheets of wind-driven rain. Tim and Elena peered out the smeared window, trying to gauge if there was any chance of a brief lull for an escape. So far, there was none. Bernice huddled near the corner, hands shaking. Simone had coaxed her into sipping more boiled water, but a worrying pallor lingered on her face. "I'm all right," Bernice insisted weakly whenever they asked, though her labored breathing told a different story. Claire feared that without proper medical care, Bernice's frail health might deteriorate. The storm, indifferent to their plight, roared on. Ranger prowled restlessly around the cramped space, sniffing at cracks and corners. He occasionally paused to nuzzle Bernice's knee, almost as though reassuring her. Each time, the older woman mustered a faint smile, a silent bond forming between her and the dog who had first uncovered her secret at the airport. Sitting on the floor, Claire held the sealed container in her lap. She had transferred it to a sturdy plastic bag for extra protection. Each time thunder shook the cabin, she tightened her grip. If there was even a tiny chance that releasing the spores could cause harm, they had to guard it with utmost care. With Harriet's warnings echoing in her mind, Claire found herself wishing she could call the forensics expert for real-time updates. But the storm destroyed all signals, leaving them stranded in uneasy isolation. Tim finally moved away from the foggy window, crossing back to the center of the cabin. "I don't see any break in the weather," he said grimly. "The creek's likely flooded worse by now. Even if we tried trekking out in the dark, we'd risk landslides, falling branches, or worse. We might be stuck till morning." Elena rubbed the back of her neck. "I've been in storms that lasted 2 or 3 days up here, but we're on a ridge, so hopefully we won't face sudden flooding around the cabin. The biggest risk is the temperature dropping overnight, or if the wind damages the roof." Simone glanced at Bernice, then looked at Claire. "One of us should keep a close eye on her vitals. If her heartbeat goes irregular again, we'll need to do CPR or call for a medevac, if we can even get one in this weather." Claire nodded. She felt helpless. Her job was to safeguard airport security, to solve problems swiftly and decisively. Now she faced a situation where all her training couldn't control the storm or conjure immediate rescue. "We'll take shifts," she decided. 2 people rest, 2 stay awake. That way we're ready if the weather changes or if Bernice needs help. They divided up the night's schedule. First shift, Simone and Tim would remain awake. Second shift, Claire and Elena, Bernice wrapped in the foil blanket, would be monitored around the clock. The best they could do was rotate watch, preserve energy, and pray that the tempest might subside by dawn. Simone settled in with Tim near the door, adjusting her mask and gloves whenever she checked outside in case the wind drove a spray of rain in. Claire peeled off her damp jacket and laid it on a battered chair, then found a relatively dry spot on the floor next to Ranger. "Take a breather, boy," she murmured, running her fingers behind his ears as he stretched out. The dog gave a soft sigh, placing his head on his paws. Claire leaned back, trying to find a comfortable position on the rough floorboards. Exhaustion tugged at her. She closed her eyes, lulled by the steady drip of rainwater into a bucket near the stove. It didn't take long for drowsiness to creep in. Her body demanded rest after the non-stop ordeal of the last 2 days. Before she fully surrendered to sleep, her mind replayed the moment Ranger had saved that container from plummeting off the cliff. If it had fallen, who knew what catastrophe might have ensued in the valley below? She opened her eyes to slivers of lamplight. Tim's voice drifted across the cabin in soft conversation with Simone. Something about the logistics of crossing the creek at first light. Claire exhaled, letting her eyelids close again. She felt Ranger's warm body next to hers, and the swirl of guilt and worry tangled in her thoughts eventually gave way to fitful slumber. Hours later, a gentle shake on her shoulder roused her. Elena, her hair still damp and face drawn, offered a tired smile. "Your shift," she whispered. "We haven't seen any improvement in the weather. Simone's just about to doze off." Claire sat up stiffly, feeling the ache in her muscles from lying on the hard floor. Ranger stood as well, stretching. The dog's alert gaze suggested he was ready to pick up his job at a moment's notice. She offered a quick nod of thanks to Elena, then got to her feet. Outside the window, blackness pressed in, broken only by sporadic flashes of lightning. Simone and Tim had indeed nearly dozed off. They jerked awake when Claire approached. "Any changes?" Claire asked, voice hushed to avoid disturbing Bernice. Simone shook her head, stifling a yawn. "No, rain's still pounding. She's stable but restless. Keep an eye on her." With that, Simone and Tim exchanged weary smiles and set about finding a corner to rest. Claire checked on Bernice, who lay curled on the bench, her breath coming in shallow rasps. The older woman roused slightly at Claire's presence, blinking under the lantern glow. "Is it morning yet?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Not yet," Claire murmured, leaning in gently. "We're swapping shifts. Try to get more rest. You'll need your strength." Bernice nodded, then swallowed hard. "Thank you for not leaving me behind." A pang of sympathy coursed through Claire. "We'd never do that," she assured her. "Just focus on getting through this." She pulled the emergency blanket tighter around Bernice's shoulders. Then she scanned the cabin's interior. Ranger sat near the door, ears perked, as though waiting for instructions. Elena was rummaging in Tim's pack, presumably looking for any extra supplies. Claire poured what was left of the boiled water into a tin cup, downing the lukewarm liquid. It tasted faintly metallic from the makeshift burner, but she swallowed it gratefully. For the next hour, Claire and Elena kept quiet vigil. The storm outside showed no signs of abating. Occasionally, the wind rattled the door, causing a draft to snake through the cabin. They fed a few scraps of broken wood into the small burner's flame, hoping the faint warmth would stave off the chill. Ranger mostly lay near Claire, but each time lightning flashed, he lifted his head, listening. Once, Claire thought she heard the faint rumble of a landslide far off in the forest, and her stomach clenched with worry. If the trails were being torn apart, tomorrow's escape would be even harder. Sometime after midnight, Bernice's soft weeping broke the stillness. Claire rushed to her side, followed by Elena. Bernice pressed a hand over her chest. "I can't breathe," she gasped. Alarmed, Claire helped her sit upright. Simone, hearing the commotion, stirred from her doze and grabbed the medical kit. The little oxygen cylinder Tim had in his gear quickly came out. They placed a mask over Bernice's face, adjusting the flow. Gradually, her respiration steadied, though tears continued to stream down her cheeks. "It's all right," Simone soothed, brushing back Bernice's damp hair. "Just breathe slowly, in and out." Ranger edged closer, tail low, sensing the distress. His large eyes seemed to reflect Bernice's fear. After a tense few minutes, she calmed enough to speak again. "I'm sorry," she managed, voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "I feel so guilty. I've endangered everyone." "You didn't know," Claire said gently, though deep down she wished Bernice had spoken up sooner about the container's origins. Now wasn't the time for blame, however. "We'll get through this, and you'll get the care you need." Gradually, Bernice's breathing eased to a more regular pattern, though worry etched every line of her face. By the time the crisis passed, they were all fully awake. Tim repacked the medical kit, exchanging uneasy looks with Elena. "She needs a hospital soon," Elena murmured to Claire under her breath. "If this storm doesn't let up by morning, I'm not sure how we'll manage." Claire nodded grimly. Despite everything, they could do nothing but wait for daylight and hope the rain receded enough to cross the swollen creek. She sank down beside Ranger, who rested his muzzle on her leg, offering silent comfort. Thunder rumbled again, making the cabin's timbers groan. Simone wrapped an arm around Bernice, trying to help her find a more comfortable position. Time dragged on in a haze of flickering lantern light, cramped limbs, and the constant roar of wind. Lightning flared sporadically, each flash revealing the worry etched into every face. Claire glanced at the taped container, now sealed in an extra plastic bag, for what felt like the 100th time. Such a small object, yet it had upended all their lives. At long last, the sky outside began to lighten, the storm's wrath giving way to a persistent drizzle. Dawn had arrived, pale and tentative. Tension weighed on the group, but a fragile hope stirred too. Maybe now they could risk an evacuation. Maybe the creek had receded enough for a careful crossing. And maybe if they succeeded, they could finally unravel the full truth behind what Harold Wilcox left hidden in those ashes, and grant Bernice the closure she deserved without endangering anyone else. A gray dawn crept through the cracks of the old ranger cabin, revealing weary faces and soaked gear scattered across the floor. Exhaustion weighed on everyone's features, yet a faint stirring of hope took hold. Outside, the storm's once thundering rage had quieted to a persistent drizzle. The low, rumbling clouds still loomed overhead, but they no longer unleashed the torrential downpour that had trapped them through the night. Claire gently shook Tim awake. "We should check the stream," she said, voice hushed so as not to disturb Bernice, who had finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Ranger rose at once, tail flicking in slow arcs as if sensing the possibility of movement. Across the cramped space, Simone and Elena quietly gathered gear. Each step on the cabin's floorboards felt momentous. If the creek was still impassable, they could be stranded for hours more. Before stepping outside, Claire tucked the sealed container, double-bagged for protection, into her waterproof vest once again. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a persistent reminder of their mission. She paused to check on Bernice, who lay wrapped in the emergency blanket. The older woman's breathing was steady for now, though her face looked drawn and colorless. Simone gave Claire a small nod, indicating Bernice was stable for the moment, but she wouldn't remain that way indefinitely. Shoving open the door, Tim led the way. The morning air felt raw, heavy with the lingering scent of wet pine and churned mud. Fog clung to the ground, swirling around fallen branches and uprooted saplings. The group picked their way cautiously, guided by Elena's memory of the trail down to the water. Rain pattered the leaves above, but lacked the furious edge of the previous night. As they hiked, Ranger trotted on alert, sniffing the freshened morning air. The forest glistened, droplets sliding off needles and leaves, trickling in rivulets over rocks. Every so often, thunder rumbled faintly, as though reminding them that the storm might return. Tim's boots squelched in waterlogged earth. "Watch your footing," he called over his shoulder, glancing worriedly at a small landslide that had tumbled loose not far from the path. When they reached the creek, a collective sigh of relief rippled through them. Though the current still ran swift and turbulent, the water level had receded enough to reveal large stones that could serve as stepping points. Claire eyed them, stomach clenching at the thought of crossing with an injured widow in tow. Still, it looked more feasible than the night before. Elena tested one stone, braced by Tim's steadying arm, then hopped to the next. She motioned for the others to follow. "We can make it if we move carefully," she said, "but we need a rope for safety." Tim anchored one end around a stout pine, then tossed the coil to Elena. Within minutes, they'd fashioned a makeshift guideline across the creek. Claire radioed Simone back at the cabin with a crackling update. "Water's lower. We think we can cross." The static-laced reply confirmed Bernice was awake and ready to move if necessary. Claire took a moment to steel herself for what would be the most delicate part of the operation, helping Bernice across without risking a fall and without letting go of the container they'd fought so hard to keep secure. They returned to the cabin. Bernice was propped on the bench, cheeks slightly flushed from the effort it took just to stand. Simone and Tim brought her to the doorway, supporting her on each side. "I can walk," Bernice insisted, but the quaver in her voice betrayed her anxiety. "I'm just tired." Ranger pressed close, nose brushing Bernice's knee, as though to show solidarity. She patted his head with a trembling hand. The group set out, trekking slowly downhill. The drizzle soaked everyone's hair, but it was blessedly mild compared to the night's savage storm. Once at the creek, Tim and Simone guided Bernice onto the first stepping stone, her arms clinging to them for balance. Claire clutched the rope container secure in her vest, while Elena provided extra support from behind. Each step felt like an eternity, water rushing around their ankles, cold and slippery. More than once, Bernice wobbled, and Claire's heart lodged in her throat. But the makeshift rope held firm, and Ranger, daring to cross on his own four paws, made it safely to the other bank, shaking himself vigorously once his feet touched solid ground. When Bernice finally reached the far side, she sagged against Tim, her breath ragged. "You're doing great," Claire murmured, taking Bernice's arm gently. Her own pulse raced with relief. They had crossed the biggest barrier. Now, if the trails weren't washed out too severely, they could reach the vehicles and drive back to Westbridge, where medical care awaited. The journey downhill took hours, each step a careful negotiation with the mud-slick path. Twisted roots, broken branches, and hidden potholes lurked everywhere. Elena led the way, hacking through stubborn brush. Tim supported Bernice. Simone and Claire brought up the rear, Ranger trotting diligently between them. He seemed energized, as if the morning had revived him after the long night in the cramped cabin. Eventually, they emerged at the clearing where the two off-road vehicles stood, caked in mud but otherwise intact. Tim let out a triumphant laugh, relief evident in his voice. "Looks like we still have wheels." He helped Bernice into the back seat of the first truck, laying a blanket over her lap. Claire climbed in next to them, container carefully held in place. Simone and Elena took the second truck, with Ranger hopping into the passenger seat beside Simone. The drive down the muddy back roads was harrowing, The vehicles skidded on slick curves, narrowly avoiding fallen limbs. But after another tense hour, they reached the paved outskirts of West Bridge. Rain still fell, yet the sense of confinement lifted as they rolled back into civilization. Locals, busy clearing storm debris, glanced curiously at the mud-spattered convoy. By the time they arrived at the small regional clinic, Bernice was nearly unconscious with fatigue. Medics hustled her inside. Claire, Simone, and Ranger lingered in the waiting area, hearts pounding from the final rush. Elena and Tim parted ways, promising to file a detailed rescue report. Claire thanked them profusely, reminded once again of how altruistic locals could be when lives were on the line. If not for them, Bernice might have stayed lost on the mountain. Eventually, a weary nurse emerged, asking for Claire. "She's stable," the nurse said. "Exhaustion, mild hypothermia, some arrhythmia in her heart. But she'll recover if she rests. She's asking for you and your dog?" The nurse's puzzled look fell on Ranger, who lifted his head attentively. Claire followed the nurse into a small private room. Bernice lay under warm blankets, an IV drip in her arm. Her eyes flickered open when Claire and Ranger approached. A feeble smile touched her lips. "You made sure I got here," she whispered. "Thank you." Claire gently set the container on a nearby table, still sealed in its plastic. "We also saved Harold's ashes," she said softly. "But we have to hand them over to the authorities. That might mean analyzing them further." Bernice nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. I'll cooperate with whatever tests they need. But if it's possible, if it's not dangerous, I still want to scatter a portion of Harold's remains in that meadow someday." Claire glanced at Ranger, who was nuzzling Bernice's free hand. Even as a security officer bound by regulations, she felt a pang of compassion. "We'll see what can be arranged, Mrs. Wilcox," she promised. "First, let's confirm everything is safe. The important thing is that you're all right." The older woman pressed her lips together in gratitude, stroking Ranger's head with trembling fingers. Simone entered the room with a phone pressed to her ear. "Harriet's on the line," she announced quietly. "The hazmat unit is ready to receive the container. They want to do immediate containment and advanced testing at their secure lab in the city." Claire looked at Bernice, who closed her eyes in acceptance. Then Claire rose to her feet, crossing to Simone. "Tell them we'll be there as soon as we can. We'll need a police escort to ensure safe transport." Claire lifted the container, the taped lid still intact. She felt a twinge of relief that it had made it through so many perils without leaking. Within half an hour, a small caravan formed outside the clinic. Local police cars, Simone's cruiser, and a specialized hazmat vehicle with sealed compartments. Claire transferred custody of the container to 2 technicians wearing protective suits. Ranger watched, tense but calm, as they carefully packed it into a shock-proof case. "We'll keep you updated," one of the technicians told Claire, his voice echoing behind a respirator. "From what we've heard, it might be some genetically modified fungus or spore. We'll run rapid tests in the next 24 hours. Claire nodded, feeling a wave of relief at no longer being responsible for the container. Yet a pang of worry remained. The outcome of these tests would shape Bernice's future, and possibly the fate of Harold's ashes. Claire cast a last glance at Bernice through the clinic's window, where the older woman dozed under observation. She deserved closure, without the shadow of danger hanging over her grief. As the hazmat vehicle rumbled away, Officer Simone rested a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. "Ranger, too. We got Bernice out alive. The container's with the right people, and hopefully we averted a crisis." Claire looked down at Ranger, who wagged his tail in silent agreement. "I just hope the tests don't reveal something even worse," Claire murmured. "I never thought an elderly widow's suitcase could lead us down this path. But if the results turn out okay, Maybe Bernice can still say goodbye in peace. Simone nodded, guiding them toward her cruiser. The drizzle lingered, making the world look washed out and subdued. But as they drove back toward Pinewood International, a shy patch of blue sky peeked through the clouds, hinting that a better resolution might be on the horizon. It took 3 anxious days before the hazmat team and the state lab completed their preliminary analysis. During that stretch, Claire found it impossible to concentrate on mundane airport routines. Every time she passed by the checkpoint where Ranger had first alerted, she recalled the silver-haired widow trembling in front of the inspection table. Now, with Bernice resting in the hospital, Claire's main worry hinged on the lab results that would determine what lay hidden inside the ashes of Harold Wilcox. At last, on a crisp afternoon, Claire received a call from Officer Simone. She sounded cautious but carried a note of optimism. "Claire, they've asked us to come to the secure facility and speak in person. Bring Ranger. Harriet will be there as well." Claire's heart pounded. Though her mind raced with every worst-case scenario, she couldn't help hoping for better news. The drive to the lab took about an hour, the route lined with leafless autumn trees. Ranger perched in the back seat, watching the scenery pass. Claire's palms felt clammy on the wheel. She arrived at a plain building with high fences and security cameras bristling from every corner. After checking in, she was escorted to a conference room. There she found Simone, Harriet, and 2 hazmat technicians who had handled the container. A tall, gray-haired scientist in a crisp lab coat introduced himself as Dr. Cadwell, the lead microbiologist on the case. "Thank you for coming," he began, folding his hands on the table. "We finished a series of advanced tests on the sample labeled Harold Wilcox remains. Our findings, I believe, will address everyone's concerns." Claire glanced at Harriet, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Ranger settled beside Claire's chair, ears perked as though listening along. Simone leaned forward. "So," Simone said, "what did you discover?" Dr. Cadwell exhaled and brought up a screen displaying complex data. The ashes were indeed primarily human remains, consistent with cremation. However, they'd been tainted by a cluster of genetically modified spores. My conclusion is that these spores originated from a mid-century military research project, likely some experimental fungus intended to degrade munitions or certain toxic substances. It appears they were inert by the time they mixed with the ashes. Harriet raised her eyebrows. "Inert meaning no longer active, no threat?" "Precisely," Dr. Cadwell replied. "Whatever viability they might have once possessed, it's degraded over decades. They can't reproduce or cause the ecological or health catastrophe we initially feared. Based on our testing, there's no sign of toxicity. Ranger's alert was logical, though. Traces of old explosive compounds and spore matter could easily draw a well-trained K9's attention." Relief crashed over Claire like a gentle wave. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So it's safe?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Bernice isn't carrying some biological time bomb?" Cadwell nodded with a faint smile. "Safe enough to return to her once the paperwork is finished. If the remains are released, there should be no danger in scattering them." Simone shot Claire a meaningful look. "Bernice will be thrilled. She's still in the hospital, but improving every day." She paused, turning to the technicians. "What about the container itself? Any reason to keep it locked up?" One of the hazmat techs shrugged. "We'll dispose of it according to protocol. It's so old and compromised that we wouldn't recommend reusing it for anything. But the ashes themselves, after a final decontamination process, can be returned." Harriet rubbed her temples, exhaling. "I'm relieved. This could have gone in so many bad directions." She looked toward Ranger, who yawned in the conference room's fluorescent lighting. "Your nose never fails to uncover hidden truths, does it, boy?" Ranger thumped his tail as if modestly refusing credit for the drama he'd set in motion. "Thank you for your quick action," Dr. Cadwell told Claire. You and your team potentially prevented a scare if someone else had found that container and assumed it was nothing. Even if it's no longer harmful, confusion could have led to panic. Claire gave a wry smile. If it weren't for Bernice's strange behavior and Ranger's instincts, we'd never have known about Harold's war relics. I just hope Bernice can finally get her peace. Moments later, she and Simone left the facility, stepping into brisk autumn air. Ranger squinted at the bright sky. Simone patted him on the side. Good work, partner. Now we have one last piece of business, telling Bernice she can scatter Harold's ashes without endangering the world. They drove straight to the hospital. Bernice was in the recovery ward, propped up against pillows, her color gradually returning. She broke into watery tears when Claire explained everything. You mean Harold's ashes aren't dangerous? I can still take him to the mountains if I choose. Claire nodded, feeling a surge of compassion. Yes, once final paperwork goes through, you'll have them back. Bernice closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. I can't thank you enough. I was so afraid I'd end up losing the last piece of him. She reached for Claire's hand. And I'm sorry for all the trouble. It's all right, Claire assured her. You didn't know, but I do have a request. Let us come with you when you finally say goodbye. We can help to make sure you're safe. The older woman's eyes glistened with gratitude. I'd be honored. A week later, with Bernice's health stabilized and the ashes cleared by official channels, Claire made good on that promise. She arranged time off with the airport administration. Officer Simone, determined to see this through, also joined. Even Harriet found a day to spare, curious to witness the final chapter of a saga she'd spent days unraveling in the lab, and of course Ranger wouldn't miss it. The dog had become a quiet hero in Bernice's eyes. On a crisp, sunny morning, 2 SUVs climbed the narrow road that led back into the Blue Pine Mountains near Westbridge. Bernice sat up front with Claire, gazing at the scenery passing by. It's much less ominous without the storm clouds, she commented, her voice steady now that she'd had time to recover. Ranger rested in the back seat, muzzle on the windowsill, soaking in the scents of pine and damp earth. At the trailhead, Elena, who had guided them previously, waited with Tim. We heard you were coming, Tim explained, smiling at Bernice. Figured we could show you a nicer path to a scenic overlook. You don't have to go all the way to that treacherous cliff again. Bernice's face creased with relief. That would be lovely. And so, in the gentle morning light, they set off on a moderate trail winding through golden-lit trees, bright autumn leaves crunching underfoot. No rain fell, no thunder threatened. The forest felt welcoming rather than forbidding. Claire and Simone walked on either side of Bernice, helping her navigate routes and occasional steep sections. Ranger padded close, occasionally veering off to sniff some intriguing scent. Harriet paused frequently to examine Flora, a reminder of her scientific bent, though she kept a respectful distance from Bernice's private thoughts. At last, they reached a clearing high up the slope, offering panoramic views of rolling hills cloaked in autumnal colors. Bernice inhaled sharply, tears misting her eyes. Harold loved vistas like this, she whispered. Carefully, she held the simple urn provided by the hazmat team, which now contained Harold's safely purified ashes. Setting the urn atop a flat rock, Bernice bowed her head. Harold Wilcox, she said softly, voice trembling. You kept secrets I wish you'd shared, but none of that changes how much you meant to me. Here, under open skies, I release you. Gently, she removed the lid, allowing a breeze to lift the fine gray powder out over the valley. The sun's rays caught floating particles, turning them silvery gold for an instant before they merged into the air. Silence reigned in the clearing, broken only by a hushed rustle of leaves in the wind. Claire felt a lump in her throat as she stood witness. After everything, the airport alarm, the harrowing rescue, the frightening lab results, This moment was heartbreakingly simple, a quiet farewell of love and memory. Beside her, Simone looked equally moved. Harriet pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking away tears. Ranger, sensing the somber gravity, sat still, tail curled around his paws. Bernice wiped her cheeks with a tissue. "I loved you for many years, Harold," she said. "It turns out you carried more shadows than I knew, but I forgive you and I hope you found peace." She replaced the urn's lid, though it was now nearly empty. Her shoulders sagged in bittersweet relief. Tim and Elena observed discreetly from a few paces away, granting Bernice her private moment. Eventually, Bernice turned back to the group, her expression a mixture of sorrow and liberation. "I can't thank you all enough," she repeated, voice thick. "Officer Claire, Officer Simone, Harriet, Elena, Tim, and especially Ranger. Without you, I might never have made it here." Claire gently laid a hand on Bernice's arm. "We're happy we could help. You've been through so much. Now maybe you can start a new chapter free of any dangerous relics from the past." Bernice's gaze fell to Ranger, who padded forward to nuzzle her hand. She smiled, smoothing a trembling palm over his ears. "You saved me more than once, Ranger. I'll never forget that." The dog gazed up with wise eyes, wagging his tail slowly. They lingered a while longer in the clearing, letting Bernice absorb the valley's view and the tranquil hush of nature. Then they headed down, steps lighter with the realization that a fresh start awaited Bernice. She would return to Westbridge for a time, finishing her convalescence. Claire and the others would go back to their regular responsibilities, carrying the satisfaction of knowing a crisis had been averted and a grieving widow had found closure. That evening, after dropping Bernice off at her small bungalow, Claire drove back to Pinewood International with Ranger dozing in the back seat. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Claire felt a wave of gratitude for Harriet, for Simone, for the rescue volunteers, and most of all for Ranger, whose keen nose had set this entire saga into motion. As she parked and entered her office, colleagues paused to ask for details. Word of the mysterious widow's ashes had traveled through the airport grapevine. Claire shared a smile with Greg, who looked relieved at the final outcome. "So Ranger wasn't wrong," he said, half chuckling. "He caught a real puzzle." "A puzzle, but thankfully not a disaster," Claire replied, patting Ranger's flank. "He's earned a good rest." And so had she, though new flights and new duties always beckoned. When Claire turned off the office lights, she felt a peaceful satisfaction. Bernice Wilcox would remember Harold in a place he cherished, and no threat now lingered in those ashes. Though the world had seemed to tremble on the brink of calamity, everything ended with a gentle scattering under a bright morning sky. Outside, as she and Ranger stepped onto the nearly empty concourse, Claire breathed in the cool air. The overhead announcement called the final boarding for a late-night flight. Ranger gave a soft, contented whine, pressing against her leg. Claire smiled, stroking his fur. She could almost hear Bernice's voice, filled with gratitude and relief, echoing in her mind. For both the widow and the world, Harold Wilcox's final secret was put to rest. And Ranger, tail wagging gently, trotted alongside Claire, ready for whatever unexpected twist life at Pinewood International might bring next.